What is Florida State going to be this season? I mean, that's the big question, and I think it's a question that, if we're being honest, can't really be answered. I mean, this was a 2-win team last season, and it's a team that basically replaced almost every part of it. By my count, somewhere between 2 to 5 starters are returning out of the team last season, and they've replaced both the offensive and the defensive coordinator. So instead of trying to make some prediction about what I think this team will do, I really felt like it was a better exercise to dive deep into Gus Malzahn and Tony White's defense. Now, Malzahn's easy. I have his film, and really I wanted to look closely at his 2023 offense, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, it's his best offense while he was at UCF, and two, I have a full season of all 22 with it. So I think that 2023 season represents a good parallel to our current season. They have a mobile quarterback, they've got a good running back, and I think it really represents what they want to do as an offense. So I took that film and I cataloged all of the plays that they ran multiple times over multiple games to see really what the core, what the base of their offense is. So let's dive into the film and see what we can expect from this year's Florida State offense. So let's start with formations. They really like to base out of 11 personnel. 11 personnel implies that there's one tight end and one running back. And it really doesn't matter which side of the ball the tight end ends up on. And we'll talk about that more as we get into the plays. But this is kind of where you'll see their bread and butter. Usually this tight end is lined up as a wing. Sometimes he's lined up as an H-back, which means that he's right inside that tackle. But almost always he's a wing, and almost always he's going to be to the field. Now you'll also see them run some 12 personnel, which means that there's 2 tight ends in the game. Usually their most common way of running 12 personnel is having both a tight end and a wing to the short side of the field. But you'll also see them run this 2x2 set. And finally, you'll see them run some 10 personnel. So I'll call this kind of their spread look. And you see 2 wide receivers on either side. And what I want you to really see out of this is that, one, these kind of different personnels that aren't 11 personnel are opponent specific. So you'll see against one opponent where it feels like they could get an advantage with an extra tight end. Maybe that defense is smaller or weaker against the run. Whereas some teams, they feel like they can get an advantage by spreading them out, maybe putting some linebackers into space that really shouldn't be in space and getting an advantage in the run game in that way. But really you'll see them base out of 11 personnel and run probably 60 to 70% of their plays out of this kind of tray formation. But no matter what they're running, they almost always will have 2 receivers to the field. So if you notice in each one of these formations, there's 2 receivers to the field. That enables a lot of their passing game, and it kind of keeps the run game pretty stationary for their offensive line and keeps the assignments pretty clear. Now, on top of these formations, they run a decent amount of motion. They have one of the highest percentage of motion rates in the country, but the motion isn't necessarily its own thing. Usually motions are just a dynamic way to get into formations. The 2 most common kinds of motion you'll see are this kind of tight end motion, where a tight end will motion in from a wide receiver position into the box as a way to kind of get him dynamically moving towards his blocking assignment. Or you'll see a lot of jet. But really what jet is doing is it's getting a running back moving towards the ball at the line of scrimmage. It's giving eye candy, it's giving the defense another thing to think about. But really it's not much different than if that running back were to be aligned there in the first place. Jet is actually kind of the one funny one. They can do a read off of this jet, and essentially all the jet is doing is it's going to flip what the quarterback and running back does. So normally the quarterback would be the outside runner and the running back would be the inside runner. And we'll talk about this more in a minute, but it really just switches their roles. So motions are kind of tacked on, but they're not really the key component. They're just a dynamic way to get into the formations that we talked about. But really where this offense comes into play and what they want to do is they want to run the football. And specifically, they're going to run a lot of inside zone. They're typically towards the top of the country in inside zone rate, with about half of the run plays that they do use inside zone blocking. The way they run inside zone, though, isn't maybe typical of what you might see from other teams that run a lot of inside zone. They typically hold their double teams for a really long period of time, often never working up to a linebacker, and they also don't try to push those double teams upfield too much. Their goal is to stagnate the defensive line and hold them. That means it's the running back's job to beat the linebackers who are not being blocked by an offensive line. What this looks like is running backs usually have a lot of patience as they enter kind of the pocket of the offensive line. Then they burst to an outside gap to try to beat the linebacker in a foot race. Now, they typically don't just run inside zone by itself. It's almost always tagged with another option. So you'll see almost every running play, unless it's an obvious rushing situation, will almost always have some kind of tag, some kind of read applied to it. And the most common kind of read you'll see is what I'll call a run-pass option. So that means that the quarterback has the option to either run the ball by giving it to the running back or pass the ball downfield. These are all over college football, but Gus Malzahn's offenses, at least at UCF, tended to major in the run-pass option. And the most common run-pass option you'll see is this glance. So a glance is basically somewhere between a slant and a post. And what the quarterback's doing is he's reading this first man outside of the box. So that's the read key that I've got highlighted in red. So he's going to read that read key. If he crashes down towards the run, that means that you have one-on-one with good leverage on the glance. If he stays out, that means that you have good numbers inside for the run. You'll also see them run some glance to the slot. Usually that's going to happen when the ball is on the hash marks, so there's extra space out towards the two receiver side, but almost always they're trying to run glance to that single receiver side. Glance is by far their most common run pass option. On these plays, if the receivers are not running a glance, their default is just to kind of run a hitch. These are almost never thrown, but occasionally you'll see them thrown, and it tends to be an opponent-specific thing. Now, they run other RPOs that aren't glance, but it's really not as common. Some other things you might see, I only really saw one or two of these out of half of the 2023 season, but they will run a quick screen every once in a while or a go out of this RPO look. But really what they're going to live off of is the RPO glance, and they're going to get really good at it. They can also run some RPOs out of counter and power. So you'll see just the offensive line has a different blocking scheme, but really they want to base out of inside zone, and that's where they're going to run a lot of their plays. Now, the other potential read that they can tag onto a play is a read option. This is a run option where the quarterback either gives the ball to the running back or pulls it himself around the edge. Instead of reading a linebacker who's outside of the box, they're usually reading a defensive end. This often puts the defense's most athletic player in a bind where you take him out of the play because he can't tackle both the quarterback and the running back. They're doing this after running so many run pass options where that defensive lineman was getting blocked that he's expecting that puller to block him, but instead that tight end bluffs that block and ends up being a lead blocker for the quarterback, which is why I call this tight end lead. One cool thing about their read options is after the quarterback pulls it, oftentimes the wide receiver to his side has the option to go on a go route. If that corner's going to suck up to try to take away the quarterback run, it's led to some explosive plays and some easy touchdowns. They can similarly run this towards the tight end. In this case, he's not pulling across the line of scrimmage, but his blocking assignment is still the same. He's blocking that linebacker instead of the defensive end, which is the read key. Notice how complementary all of these are to each other. With the read options, I'm blocking that outside linebacker while I'm reading the defensive end, or with the run pass options, we have a split blocking assignment by this tight end who's blocking the defensive end, and now we're reading that outside linebacker. The rule of thumb goes, if you're easy to read, you're hard to block, and if you're hard to block, you're easy to read. All of these different options, all of these different ideas run out of similar sets means that these defensive ends and these linebackers are guessing. Not only do they not know where the ball's going, they don't know who has the ball. And you see plays like this, where all of the defense is stuck in stone as the offense has all of these options and misdirections built in to keep them on their toes. Now, one more thing that I didn't see in 2023, but I saw a lot more in 2022 is what I'll call tight end flat, where instead of blocking the defensive end or blocking that outside linebacker, the tight end releases into the flat as a throw option for the quarterback. Now, I think they did that because Randy Pittman is a better receiving tight end than he is a blocking tight end. And since Florida State has Randy Pittman as their potential number one tight end, I expect to see a lot of this tight end flat concept in the coming season. Now, inside zone can't be your whole offense. You have to keep the defense from just packing the box with 11 people. So that means there has to be some kind of downfield passing game. Their downfield passing game isn't complicated. There's only a few concepts that you kind of see over and over. Their number one concept, the one that I saw them going to most, is what I'll call bender. Essentially, that slot receiver, that inside receiver, is going to run a bender. So this is somewhere between a 10 and in or a dig and a post. He kind of just wraps around the linebackers with his goal to just be to occupy that space between the linebackers and the safeties. You're hoping that the linebackers are getting pulled so much up by this run game, by this RPO game, that now your speedy slot receiver can get behind them while they're backpedaling, and you can get a nice 10 to 15 yard completion downfield. If the safeties start cheating down on this bender, you'll see them run a bender and out, which can be an effective way to get another chunk play. Their most common quick concept is what I'll call a quick out. Really, it's an adjustment off the RPO glance. So if this slot receiver keeps running glance, they see that the defender is cheating inside to try to take away that glance. Well, now they can hit a quick out, get an easy completion, and start moving the ball downfield. In terms of more complicated reads, in terms of multi-read options, you don't see a ton of it, but the closest thing you'll see is what I'll call this drive concept. Essentially, the number two, the second receiver from the outside, will run a 10 and in. The receiver on the outside will run a drag, and one of the receivers from the inside, either a tight end or a running back, will run an out route. These underneath routes are trying to draw the linebackers up and again hit that kind of 10 to 15 yard in route to give an easy completion and a chunk play for the offense. It's another way to run a bender, but it's a little bit more complicated and it gives the quarterback a little bit more options. You'll also see them run this kind of post wheel concept a lot. This is really kind of a flood concept. They're trying to get a lot of receivers on one side of the ball. If they're getting a lot of zone coverage, this could be something that they go to, as you tend to overload a zone and tend to find an open space with all of these bodies in one area. They typically hit that deep post out of it, the route that I've got highlighted in red, but sometimes they'll hit the wheel or the other route, and they will sometimes get into this through jet to get that wheel route going. And that's really most of their passing concepts. You don't see a lot of different ideas, and most of these are just one route reads. They're just looking for one guy, and if they don't hit him, well, then he's not open. Because of this, you'll see a decent amount of times where the quarterback will just be sitting in the pocket, where he'll hold the ball for too long because none of the routes get open. And because there's not multiple reads, because they're not trying to leverage a bunch of things by doing triangle reads and different West Coast concepts, you will often see broken plays and different things where a defense has all of the route combinations covered. One more thing to note is that on some of these routes, like the quick out, that fade is always available, but it's a pre-snap read. If he sees that corner is playing tight on the outside receiver and he might take away the quick out, then they'll just take that fade over the top and hope for an explosive play. So that's really the core of their passing concepts. One other thing that you might see them run a lot of is kind of this condensed / counter series. So a series of plays is a play that's used to set up another play that's used to set up another play. Everything in this offense kind of has an answer. Like we said earlier with inside zone, if this defensive end is cheating in really hard to try to blow up inside zone, then we can do a read option and get around them and get the edge. The same thing happens with counter and their condensed series. So you'll see them run counter sometimes out of a spread set, but usually out of this kind of condensed set. And usually there's jet motion attached. So really what you're looking for out of this is, in counter, you have pulling linemen going one direction, you might have jet action going the other direction, you have a lot of backfield motion. And this is one of the ways the wing T has kind of grown up into and proliferated through modern offenses. Really what they're trying to do is add misdirection. They're trying to go one way with the ball while adding motion and direction the other way. So you can start with just pure counter out of this, but then you'll see them run this counter reverse, which they actually went to 3 or 4 times in the games that I saw. This is also where they can add some game-to-game variability. They'll throw quarterback power into this, they'll throw running back screens, and really this is where they can get tricky and kind of develop some trick plays. That's really the heart of Malzahn's offense. They base out of inside zone and then spice it up. Who's the tight end going to block? Who's the quarterback going to read? Who's getting the ball? All of this is a very effective way to build a solid running game out of inside zone. Then they use their passing game to just try to get over top of any sort of cheating linebackers and get some cheap explosives and keep the defense honest. One common criticism of Gus Malzahn is that the game has passed him by, that his offense can no longer hold serve in modern football. I don't think that's true. One, his offense has changed dramatically over time. This isn't the same offense that we saw him running in 2013 at Auburn. And two, this is just a very solid playbook. There's answers to any problem they could run into. Now, if I were to have a complaint about this offense, it's that basically everything's going to be one read for the quarterback. I think that makes the quarterback's life easier. I think it inflates their numbers a little bit, but I do think that it can add some limitations to the passing game, and one that you see repeatedly come up as they may struggle to find open receivers downfield on some of these deeper pass plays. But ultimately, Malzahn is a solid coordinator, and there's some recent precedent for an offensively minded head coach who struggled to get wins as a head coach, walking into an offensive coordinator role and finding success. Now, when I look at previous offenses by Gus Malzahn, it takes a couple of things for them to find success. You either need a mobile quarterback, and that's a trend that's pretty consistent, or you need an elite running back. The jury's still out on whether the talent is enough at Florida State to get done what they need to get done. But the good news is that with an offense like Gus Malzahn, it's not that hard to build solid talent. Mobile quarterbacks are pretty easy to come by, especially if they don't need to be great downfield passers. And running backs tend to grow on trees. The difficulty then is finding a wide receiver that fits the system, and I think they've done a good job with Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White as 2 viable options. Do I think this offense is going to be elite? Probably not. But I do think they have a coherent enough roster and playbook to build a floor that they frankly didn't have last season. Thanks for watching. I tried to do a different format this time. Let me know how you liked it or how you didn't. I thought the visuals might both help you guys understand a kind of a more complicated topic while giving me a frame of reference to kind of do my video off of. So let me know how you felt about it in the comments below, if you hated it, if you loved it. But I'm going to be posting the PDFs that I've made here onto Noles 247, where I'll be trying to continue the conversation. So please join me over there, and I'll see you there. Go Noles.